All right, welcome everyone. We're probably gonna wait a couple more minutes until get a few more people in, and we'll get started.
Just for anybody who's still filing in, we're giving it a couple of moments to let folks get signed in. How are we doing for numbers, Charlie?
Looking about right. Maybe we should get started.
That sounds good. Okay, over to you for a sec.
All right. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining. We're gonna do just a quick kind of intro. Joanne is our head of QA and support and is gonna be running the webinar, and then we're gonna jump into a demo for most of the time, and then we're gonna save a lot of time for Q&A. So stick around and ask questions, or you can pop questions into the Q&A panel as they come up, and I can answer them as Joanne's talking, or we'll save them for the end. So with that, I'll hand it over to Joe.
Thanks, Charlie. And thank you everyone for joining us today. As mentioned, we're going to jump into a live demo of using Tracker pretty quickly and leave plenty of time at the end for your questions. But if there's a burning question or something that you feel I could answer right now in context, I mean, feel free to put it in and Charlie will convey that. So let's talk about Tracker. Tracker allows you to plan your projects by breaking down all the required tasks to deliver them into manageable chunks of work called stories. A lot of our terminology comes from Agile, which is pretty natural for teams already using XP or Scrum, for example, but it all maps to terms you'll already be familiar with if you're not doing Agile yet. So Tracker can contain everything needed for your project in one central place, and it's designed to make it easy for teams to work together and to see everything in priority order and react to change as it happens. And one of Tracker's biggest strengths is that it shows you when work can be completed based on the team's estimates and past rate of delivery. Those dictate your project's velocity, which we talk about quite a bit in Tracker, and Tracker plans out your work automatically based on that velocity. But more on that later. So you can see how that's done. Let's jump into Tracker and we'll create a new project. So this is the dashboard. This is where you land right after you sign up for or sign in to Tracker. And it's one of several places you can add a new project. So I can give our project a name. And the account that I'm using in this case is the one that I created when I first signed up for Tracker. You have the option to create an account when you sign up for Tracker, but you don't actually need one. They are separate to your user login. So if you're just invited to a project in a company account, for example, you just use that account. There's a couple of options here. By default, obviously, your project is private, and that makes sure that only people invited to that project can access it. But should you want to share your open source project with the world, you also have that option with public. So let's create this project. So here it is, this Tracker, all empty at the moment. It contains a sidebar and panels that enable you to contain stories, contain your work, and you can close them, you can reopen them again. There's various options here that I'll touch upon as I go there. So Tracker doesn't make a whole lot of sense without stories in it. So let's create one. And typically stories are created in this panel called the Icebox. The Icebox is a place for you to start sketching out your stories, your ideas, formulating what you're going to be working on. And it's almost like an inbox in a way. So this is the place where you start sketching these things out before you prioritize them and choose what to do with them. So let's create a quick feature story here. Friendly and consistently styled 404 and 500 error message pages might be something that you wanted, for example, but you'd frequently go through adding lots of stories. Then you can do other things. This one's a feature. There are actually 4 story types here. Bug you'll be familiar with, I'm sure. Chore, which is a simple type that goes through a much shorter workflow than features or bugs. This is for stories that you're not necessarily going to have a project manager accept. Might be something that you used for infrastructure type tasks. Let's say you need a new SSL cert, you need to set up a test environment. That's the sort of thing you might need a chore for, and releases that I'll go into a little bit further. So here's your story. You could add your requirements and information about your story in here. If you want to tag the story with a particular label to help you find it later, you can do that. You can add tasks that are usually just simple checklist items that you might want to call attention to. And down here, your activity feed, as you start to have conversations about your stories, that would appear here. So this is me, I'm making the comment. And if I wanted to draw the stories to somebody's attention, I could mention them in there. So not many people in this. Normally you get a list of people, but this is a brand new project that I haven't got anybody in yet. So there's no one to mention. It's sad and alone. So save this. I could also add, a bug story. So you can continue through like this, but Tracker makes a little bit more sense when there's more in it. So I'm going to jump across to a project that I created earlier to demonstrate things a little bit more. So here is to illustrate this idea of Tracker being more of an inbox. I put a release marker in. There are milestone markers, and you can also use them in this way to delineate what's happening. And if people were dropping stories in here, maybe bugs ready to be prioritized, they would all appear at the top of the icebox. And a little marker like this can let the project manager look at those and decide where these would be prioritized in the backlog. So as I said, this backlog makes a little bit more sense now. It's got things in it. These stories are in priority order. The story at the top is the one that you would expect somebody to work on next, or as they were going through the stories, they would pick up the next story that they could work on if for some reason, they weren't going to be working on one of these earlier stories. So there's this sense and track of the simple priority, top to bottom, through your backlog. So this is the core of Tracker. Your backlog being essentially a prioritized list of stories. So you can easily change the order. And let's say I started this story. I said this, as I mentioned, this is a simpler workflow. With a chore, you just really get started and finished. And once the story is started, that's deemed the most important thing. So you can't actually drag these other stories up above it because it's automatically more important because you're working on it. If for some reason you want to pause work on the story, you would go in and you'd change its state to an unstarted state, should you need to. And you would usually make a comment or label a story paused, for example, to help highlight that. Let's finish that story. And it's done. And at the end of this iteration that we're working on, that's currently set from the 24th of July to the 30th of July, so it's 1 week, which is the default. So at the end of that, then stories roll over into the done panel, and you can see these iteration markers that show when things happened. And by the same token, these other iteration markers shows you when Tracker predicts that these other stories can be accomplished. This glowing release marker red is past its date. It's crazy date in here just so that it goes red for you to show you what happens when it looks like this release is not going to be completed on time, because you have the ability to set a date for releases should you wish. Release markers are pretty simple, straightforward things. Everything above them are destined for this particular milestone. They're not containers specifically. They're really just an indication that as these stories get completed and travel through the workflow, this release marker is going to follow them and show your progress towards completion. If you want a little bit more visual heft and more of a container idea for your releases, what I've done for this is I've given all the stories above this release marker the beta label, which I would have done in here. I would have selected beta for it, selected apply. So there's this beta label, but this is a special label that's purple. This indicates that I have created an epic for it. And an epic is, in the hierarchy of Tracker, you have a project. You can create an epic, which is for a larger feature, theme, or milestone. And then stories are within those epics. That's kind of the hierarchy for Tracker. And creating an epic is pretty easy. You can just add one like anything else in Tracker. And here's the one I created for my beta project. And I can see a little bit more about what's going on with that epic, the progress and the estimated completion for it. And again, you can add a description. Typically in epics, we'll add perhaps links to mock-ups for design or attachments to indicate what design ideas should be. Definitely a lot more description in epics about what something is, what the feature set is, so that it's this higher level view of a set of stories that can be quite useful. And then of course you can see all the stories that are specific to that epic and where they are. So I shall deselect all these. There are other bulk options as well that you can get to here. Close that down. So it's a very quick skim over epics there. So I talked about iterations very briefly. You're obviously going to want to carve up your iterations or sprints, the chunks of the time in which you want to deliver something concrete. And project settings is the place where you can set up some of those good things. Here I've got iterations starting on Monday. You might have a different day of the week. You can set a project start date, time zone, just to make sure that everything that's happening in the project appears in a specific time zone should you wish. And here's your iteration length. So you might be doing things in 2 weeks chunks, you might be doing monthly deliverables. We tend to go for a shorter time frame because we want to try and be delivering something at the end of each week if we can. But obviously different teams and projects run at different paces. So back to this velocity thing that I haven't gone into too much yet. This is a simple point scale, and this is what we use for estimation in Tracker. You can choose others, you can create a custom estimate and all those good things. Let's cancel out this to stories. So when we have stories that are coming up that haven't been discussed by the team yet, we have an iteration planning meeting. And during that, the entire team is there and they will go through these stories and discuss them to make sure that the business case is understood for the story, that the feature itself is understood, the big picture is understood, and the granular bit of this broken down story that's as small as it can be in order to be sort of useful and acceptable. So the team discusses this, and they're going to come up with an estimate about how long or how difficult it is to complete a particular story. Some teams do start off by equating points to time. We find that doesn't work so well. What works much better with stories is to think of them in terms of size or complexity or difficulty. So in this case, where we've got our simple 0, 1, 2, 3 point scale, we would equate that to 0 being sort of pretty trivial. You're going to knock that out. It's not too complex. 1 point, it's pretty straightforward, not too complicated, not too risky. 2 points, kind of middle of the pack. It's medium level of effort, perhaps. And 3 points, that's pretty large. That's pretty involved. We might even consider breaking down the story smaller if we can. And then during the meeting, we do the simple Rochambeau thing where when the story is discussed and people feel that they understand it, whoever's running the meeting will say, okay, let's estimate 1, 2, 3, and then people will hold up a number of fingers that equates to the number of points they think the story is. And in some cases, someone might throw up, all their fingers because they're basically saying, no, we don't understand this yet. This thing is huge. We need to discuss further. And any difference in people's estimates are discussed at that point. If someone's a 0 and someone's a 3, it's good to figure out what have we missed in the discussion that makes people vary. Then once agreed, you would select your points. You can also do that, in here, should you wish to, on a collapse story. And you start to get this picture of how long things are going to take. So back to velocity. Velocity, as mentioned, when you first start a project, you set your initial velocity in project settings. The default is 10 because we're just putting something in there to get you started. As the team actually works on stories and more iterations complete, you can set your iteration strategy, and by default we average over 3 iterations. So it's the average. Your velocity is the average number of points you complete in accepted stories during an iteration. So in the case of 10, you're fitting 10, or if you as soon as you tip over 10 points worth of stories, this new iteration bar is going to appear to say, okay, this is as much as we can fit in this iteration. This is as much as we can fit into the next one, and so on as you go through your project, to give you this idea of when things are going to be done. And as you do more iterations, as your team settles into a steady cadence, the velocity gets more accurate, and so does your planning and tracker showing you when you're going to be done. So what haven't I covered? I've gone a little, haven't really covered the workflow yet. So you've got these estimated stories. Somebody's going to start working on them. Once they're done and the code, things are checked in, click finish. Then deliver is a state that is for usually delivery to a test environment so that the story can be accepted by a product owner, product manager. And if it's a bug being accepted, sometimes your test team is going to be doing the acceptance there after it's delivered to a test environment. So then you've got this accept, reject idea. Reject, so harsh, but it just means revisit. It means, this story it isn't ready to go, and it means it doesn't match what was desired for it, or there's a bug with it that is so bad it's basically unacceptable. Otherwise you would probably enter separate bugs that where you would reference this feature. So you would reject, you'd give a reason. Just going to reject it for now, and that sets it through the workflow again. Nice straightforward workflow. Finish, deliver, and finally accept. So there's a straightforward workflow in tracker there to help you get going. And let's see, what have I missed in here in terms of iterations and stories, chores. Showed you some of this good stuff. Another thing when people sometimes ask about is the My Work panel. This is everything that you are currently working on or you've requested. So this is everything that pertains specifically to you. And should you need to see what somebody else is working on, you can always, click the initials. This would be me again, but hang on, here's another one. So I haven't got any work. Oh, I completed that story, so there's no work to be done. That's why that isn't showing anything. But if I added Charlie to this, then you'd see that this is something that he has in his list to work upon. So I think I see a couple of questions popped in, Charlie. Is there anything I should answer before I should plow on?
Nope. I answered the couple questions that came in, and you can just keep on going.
Superb. So another thing that folks are interested in often are analytics for a project. this is just a test project, so the analytics are a bit of a mess, but here is one of those public projects I talked about. This is a Cloud Foundry, Diego. This is a pivotal public project. We have a number of open source initiatives to do with Cloud Foundry. So this sheet gives you some real data. And it's showing you general trends for what's been accepted in the story, the breakdown of the different story types. Story cycle time has dropped right off there. The rejection rate was nice and low, seems to be popping up again. We're always interested in rejection rate. I mean, there's no negative association. It's just if rejection rate is high, does that mean we're not defining project requirements well enough? What's the story there? What's causing something to be rejected? Is it being rejected because some area is very buggy? What does that mean? Why were tests, maybe additional tests, automated tests needs to be written? It lets you get a picture of the project and start asking questions about it. So you can pop through and see more about different releases. You can see releases that are passed. This one's a little slow. There's a lot of data to load in there, but there's a lot that you can look at and analyze. I'm not going to go into this in depth, but it gives you an idea of some of the areas you can explore in Tracker when you're wanting to find out a little bit more about the data behind the stories that you're working upon. Another sort of bigger picture kind of thing is Workspaces. So you might have multiple projects, and in that case, you might set up a multi-project workspace. And here's one I'm calling Roadmap because I've specifically created this workspace to just have Epics panels in it to give me a side-by-side comparison of what's going on in my different projects. And you can also reorder items in the Epics panel. So this might be the order in which I wish these features to be completed, or the order in which features and milestones appear in the project. A couple of different ways that you can slice this. But then you get the side-by-side comparison. You might just have a multi-project workspace that views different panels that you're interested in, just your backlogs. So it's just to give you this further back view and this side-by-side comparison. And you can also perform bulk actions in here. You can drag drop stories to different projects. You can see your work across multiple projects. So everything that you're working on, you can see in there. And search is cross-project. If you have those moments that I occasionally do that I've entered a story, but which project did if it was one of those nebulous ones that you're thinking, I'm not actually convinced I put that in the right backlog, you can find it by searching in here and then perhaps move it to a more appropriate spot. So that gives you some high-level view there. Let's go. And you can search for projects here. Let's go back to this guy. You can reorder panels in Tracker. And one thing I haven't gone over yet is this idea of blocked stories. We now have, relatively recently, a new feature to help you with stories that are perhaps blocked by another story. That you can just put a simple block label on, but this feature lets you go in and let's say that this story was blocked by the one underneath it. I could copy that ID, go in here, add that this story was a blocker, and then you can immediately see that the story is blocked and that this story is blocking it. So you get these visual indications of what's going on. And you can see a little bit when you just mouse over, you can see this little preview to give you more information. Another handy thing about pasting in links, and you can paste them in, in other spots in the project, but anyway, you see one of these little pills, you can get a preview of the story and see its state and just enough information about it to help you understand what's going on in that particular case. And so the blocked panel lets you focus in on those specific issues. So I definitely encourage you to experiment with Tracker, try Tracker out. We have a couple of methods of getting help. We have the Help Center. There's a little feature tool that you can run through. It's presented to you automatically when you first go into a project in Tracker. So you can explore those things. The Help Center lets you search, browse. You can look into our API if you're interested. And it's really easy to get in touch with us. Support is happy to help you with any kind of question. It's a very knowledgeable team, and so we're happy to answer all kinds of questions regardless of what they are. Speaking of the developer API, a lot of customers have used this to create integrations in Tracker. We have some of our own integrations. They're kind of in here. We have our own integration with Jira, Zendesk, GitHub. Slack have created their own integration with us, but you can find out more about those there. And for Tracker specific integrations, it's another setting. You can go in and set up an integration should you wish to with different products. There's a few possibilities in there. When you've got an integration set up, which I don't think I have with this, no, that was remiss of me. You can do things like you get a whole new panel, for example, for Zendesk, and you can drag drop tickets into Tracker, have a story automatically created for you, and then you can track support incidents in Tracker. So there's a number of different options there. So there's a lot to explore, and I'm sure you've got some questions to get onto and some things that I've missed that you're curious about, or that maybe you'd like me to go back to. So over to you. Have we got anything, Charlie?
We sure do. Let's go from the top here. This is something we get a lot, I would say. Good question. We get a lot. Is there a way to allow upper management to see what projects each individual in his team are working on and the progress made?
So Tracker is more about the team as a whole, though if you do need to see something about individuals, I'd say definitely set up one of these workspaces. And then you can just click on initials to see across projects. You can see the work that somebody's working on. And in this, I haven't got it set up to show multiple people in multiple projects too well, but you could see everything that Charlie was working on in all the different projects that he was working on. As far as individual progress, it would be the estimate for the story would give you an indication of the size of the story. And your conversations in morning stand-ups is generally where we see if people are stuck. Generally, these stories are expected to be completed with an iteration. And in morning stand-ups, if something was dragging on, if something was definitely not, it had been underestimated in terms of how difficult and complex or missed requirements, that would come up there. So that helps you see a little bit if things are on track or not. Those all important morning conversations. It can also call things out to you in the projects themselves. If somebody's stuck, if something's blocking, if something needs more work, you can definitely mention people. And one thing I didn't go over was notifications. It's your profile notification settings. You can choose what in-app notifications that you're getting, and email notifications for mentions, story state changes, all that good stuff. I won't dwell on that too much, but that's one of the techniques of drawing people's attention to something. Would be a mention, though honestly, if somebody was really struggling with the story and it was way underestimated and it was at risk of delay, I would be hoping that somebody would just come and have a conversation with you or ping you directly.
All right, we got a couple more questions here.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain the difference between a blue blocker and a red blocker?
Yeah, the icons are a bit of cheese. So let me go back to this guy where I actually have some blockers. So this is the story that's blocked. So the red marker is saying I'm blocked, and the blue one is saying I'm blocking. So it's blocked and blocking. So blue is for blocking, and red is obviously denoted because that's more, danger. There's a problem here.
Alrighty, let's see. Can we create an integration with a product called PlanView?
plan view. Probably without looking at their API. That's not one that I've come across personally. But if they have an API set up, that should be possible to set up some form of integration with them. Maybe a webhook could be set up. Happy to answer that in more detail, but that's one that drop me or support an email so we can provide you with a little more guidance there, because we need to actually look at that product to see what would be entailed in that. But the answer is usually yes. It depends how much effort you're prepared to put into it, though, with the ones that we aren't predefined. But there are also products like Zapier who make it easy to do integrations with other products. So that's another one worth looking into.
All right, Nara. Please ask any more questions if you have them. We only have one more question here. We may have had one in the chat. Is there a main board where I can see, if managing multiple projects, which ones are on time and which ones aren't? So I think this is kind of an analytics question.
Yeah, good question. I think that's another one where you'd want your work to rely on your workspace, and possibly even actually a better one would be more of the roadmap one I set up. If you use Epics fairly extensively, you can take advantage of progress bars to look at the individual features that or major areas that you're working on. So that will help give you a general sense if you're on track with each project in a set of multiple projects. So that gives you a little bit of an overview of those if you are managing multiple projects. We are working on some other designs for different ways of bubbling up the bigger picture. But for now, I would definitely recommend Workspaces.
Alrighty, last question here. When a big project is divided into small releases, can we view the overall burn down rather than just of between releases?
So the burn down of, let's go back to analytics. Look at these. So yeah, we definitely look at burn downs per release rather than from the entire project. So the burn up is more for the entire project, but burn down is per release. So you might want to look at burn up charts if you're looking for the big picture for the entire project, if that helps.
Yep, and the next person was just interested in seeing analytics again, which we are back in. So you want to poke around a little bit more? I think we kind of went over.
Just a little bit. So yes, definitely burn down is per release in this, and you can examine epics more closely and look at reports for a specific epic, which is going to take its time to load, of course. Time always moves at a different rate when you want to show people things.
Isn't that true?
Isn't that true? So you can look at epic progress. You can look at the accepted stories. You can drill down into what's going on, unstarted stories, and you can click on any of these story IDs to drill down into the story themselves. So there's plenty of opportunities to sort of drill down deeper from the general overview and make different choices. You can see general story activity. Some folks like to capture the basis of their own reports. And you can dump the raw data to CSV if you wish to manipulate it further, because sometimes our reports aren't exactly what you want. So that's something that you could customize should you wish. And you can print any of these to PDF if you want to share them in an email, for example. I didn't go into roles and permissions in Tracker, but you can set people up to be viewers only of projects. So if you wanted to give somebody the ability to take a look at all projects without necessarily collaborating in them or making any changes, that's an option for making your work more visible. But as I say, you can always send around a PDF of any of these should you wish to share those.
Yeah, while we're in here still, Bonnie asks, how can I see the volatility, not just velocity?
good question. So it is in analytics, but we also show volatility on the dashboard for each project. So obviously these are all zero because these aren't real projects that are being worked on. But your volatility or how stable or unstable your project is in here. Let's go back to analytics though, because you can see a little bit about. I'm just remembering where we track that in more detail. It's accepted, running velocity. Yeah, I don't think I thought there was another report where we went into more detail with volatility, but it's there on your dashboard. I think we just decided to bubble it up there onto the dashboard to make it nice and visible for you, so you can compare your velocity and volatility.
All right, we got a couple more questions in now. Can I use a CSV file to import work hours spent on each story into Tracker and somehow transform it into how much a story is completed?
So as far as CSV import, yes, you can absolutely import into Tracker stories. For adding to stories, what you'd do is you'd export your stories to a CSV and then choose where you wanted additional information to be imported into, because the column names map to the fields in Tracker. So you might want to track with a label if you wanted this level of visibility. And one thing I didn't show you are the different modes. You can choose how things appear in Tracker. That's good for demoing, and that also shows where your labels show up. But you might want to import into a label. You might want to import into, I don't know, a task potentially, just to separate it. You could just have information added as a comment, but it would really just be static data at that point. You probably want to do a more sophisticated integration if you, with whatever product you were importing from, in order to do that kind of tracking. So that's another one I might be able to answer better, offline, when and then we can get into more details of the problem that you're trying to solve and the tools that you're using to try and solve that problem.
All right, a couple more here. How can I add the story composition pie chart instead of just the bar chart?
So, is that story activity you were looking at, or so story composition? That must have been.
Composition, yeah.
So we don't give a choice in analytics of pie versus cumulative. I'm trying to think which chart it was I was showing you that had that good stuff. Epic situation. Turn up. I'm trying to think where, if anywhere, we have a pie chart these days. So unfortunately, we don't have that. That's something that if you wanted a pie chart specifically, you might want to dump to CSV and create your own specific chart for that.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Bonnie comments, I have seen it on the other project in Stories Accepted view. Oh, in the Diego? It must be this project.
Yeah, it'd be this project. Mm-hmm. And I apologize for my lousy memory.
Stories Accepted? Hmm.
Yeah, because we go for an older iteration, it'll load some accepted stories, but I think I'm thinking about something else.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we all know about that.
Yeah, Bonnie, if you just want to shoot us a note, we can probably, again, answer that better.
Yes, apologies for having a special moment with regards to that. I'll come up with the answer right after we finish and slap myself on the forehead.
Okay, we got a couple more questions coming in. Can you give me an idea of security? Can you control so only some people can view? Yeah, Joe just went over that. That is in the project settings.
So you can choose different roles for members in a project. This is the I'm just viewing this public project, so I can't control any of the settings. But they've set up some folks in here as project owners, and those owners have full control. They can invite other people, change project settings, all that good stuff. Project members cannot. Project members can participate in stories, add to stories. Um, respond to them, change the state of them, that kind of good stuff, but they can't change the settings. They can't delete any comments, and they can't invite other people. And then, I wonder if we've got any viewers in here. Probably not. Let me go back to my project here. If I wanted to change Charlie to a viewer, then it would be a read-only view. But no one can view a private project except somebody that you specifically invite to it.
Mm-hmm.
Did that answer, or?
Sure did, I'd say. Last question. Is there a very high level summary report for top management to see how many projects are active under his department? What are the upcoming deliverables, etc.?
I know, yes, you want a very high level roll up. That's something that we're definitely looking at. And it's something that we're very interested in examples of what people want to see currently, as that's something that we're working on. What folks tend to do at the moment is sometimes they share a screenshot of their workspace, or they're looking at analytics in Tracker and creating their own high level status. When it's high level, hopefully it's not too onerous to put together. Some folks use the API, as I mentioned, and some folks do CSV dumps to create their own custom reports. So at the moment, it's something that people are finding different solutions for. But we would love to get examples of what you're looking for. We're gathering as many of those as possible, because with something like a high level status, that could mean a different thing for different people, and we want to know what level of options to provide with that. Something we tread a careful path with Tracker is we want to give you what you need, but we don't want Tracker to become so complicated that you're fighting 1,000 different options to get something relatively straightforward. So use cases and examples from customers that are highly valued.
Well, that's it for the questions.
Cool. Well, if anybody has anything else or anything that we can go into in more detail, we'd be more than happy to. As I say, do drop an email to tracker@pivotal.io. I'm happy to hear from you personally. Email there. There we go. There's the support email address, and we're always happy to provide more detail, more information when that's more specific to you and what you're looking for.
Oh, we got a last minute question here. Can you replay how to create the multiple boards view?
Certainly. Let me create a brand new one. That's probably the best way to do. So I am going to create a workspace. And then you can choose the projects that you want to have in there. Let's say I decide, no, I don't want that. So there they are. If I want to have you can choose different colors for these if you want to make them more visible in your workspace. Just a little extra visual cue there. Save workspace changes. And by default, it shows the backlog for each of these projects. You don't have to have those. You can close those and choose a different set just by clicking in each of these project sections on the side. And then that's sticky. Tracker remembers what you choose to have open in terms of panels and how they're set up. So that's quite useful. So you can choose your panel set. That will be remembered every time you go back to this particular page. And as I say, you can get rid of those. And if you wanted to look at everything that was pending in your different projects that hadn't been prioritized yet, that's another view. You can have as many different workspaces as you wish to help with your different views of multiple projects. And of course, there's other panels listed here. If you just wanted a blocker, this overview was all about the blockers, then of course these are empty at the moment because I haven't done this yet. But so you could have a blocked workspace if you want to see everything that's blocked across all your projects. That would be a really quick, simple way of doing it. So you could dig into what was happening there, and if you could help unblock any of them. But there's other things you can do in terms of views. You can also, if I wanted to do a search for something, I'm just going to do a crazy search to get lots of, that's probably an unwise choice. But if you want to have a specific search that is always apparent, always lives in this view, you can pin a search, and you can always have a particular search, obviously more sophisticated than this, but you could always have a search appear in your workspace. And if you're in an individual project, you can do the normal things like save your searches, and you can pin them to the sidebar if there's specific searches that you want to do all the time. So after you've done your search, design, I could share it with somebody else, or save it to the sidebar. So that you have a quick way of getting back to the stuff every time that you want to. There we go, more answer than you wanted, but hopefully someone found that useful.
Well, I think that's about it for us, folks. Thanks for coming by.
We really appreciate it, and we appreciate feedback. And if there's anything further that we can help you with, we'd be more than happy. But thank you for your time today.
Thanks, y'all. Thanks, Melinda. Bye-bye.